how do parents and children really think about education, right? And I think to some extent we have to realize that the time, or in the olden days where you could go to an education and learn the certain set of skills and you can use those skills for rest of your life, those days are gone. Because as the technologies are becoming, growing exponentially, any skill that you learn becomes obsolete even by the time you graduate. So in some sense, the idea of learning skills is not what the education system should be about. It should be about learning to learn, learning to solve problems, and many of the problems tend to be multidisciplinary. So how do we really look at the problem at the core? How do you break down a problem and then find how to actually solve a complex problem? Because underlying all the complexities, there are really simple, basic, fundamental items that need to be solved. And if you start to take an approach that actually takes all complex problems and saying, what are the basic elements that need to be solved for this problem to be solved, you'll start to see that many of the elements already exist, and the elements don't exist is the one that you should focus on developing for the problem to be solved. And I'll give you a bunch of examples of that, right? So the first thing is that, as a parent, our job should never be, whether it's a teacher or a parent, is that to take the children to the water and make them drink, because that used to be the old theory. You bring them to class and you teach them things, and then you test them and hoping that at least they learn just enough to get a passing grade. And it doesn't matter whether you get an A or whether you get a D, and then you move on to the next thing, right? Rather than, if we look at the education similar to a video game that says it is not a fixed time variable learning, what if it is fixed learning variable time? So today in our education system, you get a semester or a trimester to learn something. Whether you learn a lot or you learn a little, as long as you get A or a D, you are actually move on to the next class. In a video game, until you master that level, whether it takes you 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years, you don't move to the next level until you master the first level. And that is a what I call fixed learning variable time versus a fixed time variable learning. The second thing is that in terms of, as we look at the future of where the children are going to be contributing most to the society, it is all around new set of technologies that are coming up. That means we have to start thinking about how do we teach children to be intellectually curious, because until you develop that intellectual curiosity in a child, they actually never go back and become a lifelong learner. So, one of the things we did with our own children were actually started to teach them about the basic fundamental. What if it was possible? Imagine a world where this actually works. Now, what would that world look like? And tell me, if you were to think about creating that world, what would needs to happen for that world to exist, right? And you start to get them into a problem solving mode. And once you do that, suddenly they are intellectually curious about every single thing that's happening. Every time they see a problem, in their mind it goes, what if it could be solved? What if this problem doesn't exist? What would the humanity look like? And once you start to change your mindset that everything is solvable, there is very few things in the world that actually can't be solved, right? So it is simply a barrier to solving the problem is what we imagine, right? So it's the imagination is the only barrier to what we can actually solve. The day before any breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. And the day after the breakthrough, it's an obvious idea. So how do you achieve these breakthroughs? And the breakthroughs are simply about experimentation. That means we as children need to learn to experiment and see our ideas not work. And that to me is the key. Today, we are taught in the schools that there is only one right answer to every problem. Here is a problem. Here are the multiple choice questions, A, B, C, D. If you think that two of them may be right, you are wrong. There's only one right answer to every problem. Whereas in the real life, we all know there are many ways of solving the problem. So we are actually, as we are educating our children, we're taking the creativity away. And in fact, there are so many studies done that when the children, before they go to school, they are curious, they are imaginative, they are creative. And as they go through the school system, we fundamentally take away their creativity, and you start to give them the knowledge. The point is, you are wasting your time. The knowledge is available on your fingertip, on your iPhone every single day. Every child can go out and find the facts of when the civil war happened, when this particular thing happened. You don't need to know the knowledge. You need to start thinking about how do you apply the learnings of that knowledge into solving that problem. Now, I can go on and on and on about how that education system that is designed as an assembly line, where you take the children and you say, just like an assembly line, all the children who are 12 years old go here, all the children who are 13 years old go here, and you go into this assembly line, and you go into this assembly line, and they take away that every single child is different. They learn differently, they think differently, they absorb the information differently. But we put them through assembly line. At the end of the day, we simply say pass, fail, and you actually go back. That, like a quality control, this one failed, this one succeeded, and you keep moving them along, right? And that system has to change. The world is going to be personalized, and it has to be customized to each individual. And I really believe in the online education, you can do all of that. The multiple ways of learning and multiple ways of solving the problem, all can be done. I think the lot of it is politics, and there are lot of things that come in. What is easy for a parent? It's easy for them to say, teaching is not my job, teaching is a school's job. So suddenly a parent washes their hands off and say, as far as learning is concerned, it happens at school. Whereas I personally believe the learning starts at home and ends at home. The parents are the best teacher, and they really have to be actively taking every moment and think of that as a learning moment. Every interaction is a way to teach the child a life lesson, right? And that those life lessons are beyond simply learning about math and chemistry and physics. It is about teaching them about the possibilities. Again, the second thing is, the parents themselves acting as an example of living the life that they are preaching. Because what happens is, many of us preach something to our children, and then we go out and do something different, and hoping the children listen to what we say. However, the children are a lot smarter than that. They watch you do things. They don't care what you say to them. And when a lot of the people, when they have a semi-success in their financial side, they say, I want to sit at home now and spend time with our children. That seemed like a good goal, and it's a noble cause in their mind to spend time with their children. Now imagine what the children see. Children see that I go to school at 7:30 a.m. My dad is sitting on the sofa watching CNBC. I come home from school, my dad is sitting on the sofa watching CNBC, and the dad says, son, you need to work really, really hard. Hard work is what it takes to be successful. Go out and do more work. And he's sitting on the sofa watching CNBC. Guess what? Then instead, what if you say, I want our children to focus on doing good for humanity, because we know if the children can stay focused on what can they do to improve the lives of people around them, whether it is thousands or millions of them, if they focus on that, not only they contribute to the society, they can also create an amazingly great enterprise or a career as an entrepreneur. But most of the parents are so, they are so risk averse that they don't want to do the same thing that they preach their children to do. Right? And that is one of the problems. Second thing is, a lot of the time, it's not the teacher are bad people. They are just not taught how do you go out and use the online education? So as opposed to really making them feel bad that you are a bad person, you don't want the children to be taught remotely, they need to be taught how to use technology, because many of these teachers, when they have been teaching the same way for the last 20, 30 years, they are not used to using the technology. In fact, their children are the one who set up their computer to make it work for them, right? So in fact, what happens is when the children are smarter than the teacher in terms of the use of the technology, the teacher doesn't get the respect of the students that actually they can teach something, right? So it's all about understanding and respect that they have to develop against the student. So I really think teaching the teachers about the new set of technologies, making it easy that where teacher's job is not to be an expert. Teacher's job shouldn't be about know it all. In fact, in my opinion, the best thing a parent or a teacher does is when a child asks a question, not to necessarily give all the answer because you think you know all the answer, to be able to say, I don't know. Let's look together and find out what the right answer is. Oh, that's a great question. Never thought of it this way. Let us Google and let's find out how this actually works. When child is curious, how do you think the plane flies, as opposed to blasting out the answer that you may be half baked. Let's say, let's learn about how plane flies, right? Or whatever that happens to be. Every single question you can make it is a joint learning experience. And when you do that, everything from your child's perspective, they start to develop this self-confidence that it's okay not to have all the answers, because we are constantly telling them that they need to know it all, they need to have all the answers. And to me, creating that environment where the learning happens is because you say, I don't know, and you're curious about learning. And that's where I think the growth happens. I think there are a couple of things here, Christy, that, one of the things is to redefine to them what success meant. And when they were young, we would tell them that your success is not going to be measured by how much money you have in the bank. It's going to be measured by how many lives you're able to improve while you're still alive, right? People will know that you're truly successful when you become humble, because humility is a sign of success. Because the day you become arrogant is the day you realize that you still have something to prove to yourself or someone else. That means you're not successful yet, right? So humility becomes a sign of success. And your self-worth doesn't come from what you own. Your self-worth comes from what you create. That means if you inherit a lot of money, you're still a parasite on humanity because you haven't contributed or created anything yourself. So to me, about teaching them about all these basic foundation of what success meant. And then, most parents would go read a bedtime story to the children. And I think we had this fun thing that I would do before bedtime. We would actually play this game where they would tell, and I would ask them, here are the 4 elements or 4 things, and I want you to tell me a story that connects them together. So idea would be, I said there is a monkey, there is an ocean, there is a tree, and there is a lion. Now tell me a story that connects all 4 of them together. And the reason we did that was because I wanted children to think that how the concept that are completely separate objects, how they can be connected together, because that gives them an ability to connect the facts that don't seem to be relevant to each other, but how you can connect these objects together and actually weave them into a single story. And this is basically building a new type of neural connections in their brain to start thinking about the world very differently than what they're used to. That means they always think about monkey and a tree, but they would never think about the monkey and an ocean. And how can you connect that? And that really was one of the games we will always play. And I think there are other ways of the things was to have them focus on every time they will come back and say, oh, that just can't be done. I would stop them right there and say, what if it could be done? Now let's sit down and let's talk about, for this to be done, what is it that needs to happen that would actually make it happen? right? And we don't know whether it cannot be done. Don't worry about how, just focus on what, right? What needs to be done. Let's not worry about how it is going to be done, but what needs to happen for this problem to be solved. And then we can go drill down and say, what are the different ways of solving that problem? But let's just stay focused on what, because that gives them a basic understanding of how every problem can be solved. Just if you could do this, this problem can be solved. And then we can focus on how to do that, right? The other part that really I found to be fascinating with our children was, we will always say, don't look at the world what is, focus on what you want the world to be. That means don't worry about, is this glass half empty or half full, because that doesn't really matter. What matters is, do you want to fill this glass, and with what? Because if you want to fill the glass, then do you really care it is half empty or half full? And if you don't care to fill the glass, then you don't care whether it's half empty or half full. So that means you focus on what is it that you want the world to be, and then you take the world from here to where you want the world to be. Well, first of all, we as parents have to fundamentally change ourselves, right? Which is that video games are not bad, right? So in some sense, when the books or the newspapers first came out, our grandparents said, oh my God, that's the end of the world. No kid is going to go play outside, because now they're reading the magazine, now they're reading the newspaper. God forbid they're now reading the book, right? And now, so obviously my point is, every generation has challenges with the technology that came about. To me, our kids are more social than we ever were. I mean, the fact is, when I was young, maybe I connected with 2, 3, or 5 people who just happened to be in my neighborhood, and that was all my social life that was. Today, our children are connected to people around the country, and hundreds of them, and they know much more intimate details about each one of their friends than we ever knew, because they're posting them on Snapchat, they're posting them on TikTok, and every one of our child, actually our cousins, everyone, they can tell me everything about what's happening in their life. So my point is, when we think our kids are not socially connected, we are wrong. They just connect differently than we did, right? So people used to meet in front, each other. When the telephones came out, we start calling each other, and our parents said, oh my God, there goes the society. People cannot talk to each other because now they're on the phone all the time. My point is, there is nothing new here. In fact, I would tell you that when my oldest was young, when he was 2.5, 3 years old, I would buy them his educational CD-ROM games. He used to want to play video game. So I bought them the Math Blaster, which was basically a Space Invader game. But to actually load the weapons, he had to solve the problem. So he learned all of his math. When he was, by the time he was 3.5, he was doing algebra. He was doing mathematics of whether it's a division or multiplication, because that's the only way he could play the video game. I bought him the Reading Rabbit and the Writing Rabbit, and he learned all the lessons from these video games, because it gave him the motivation to go to the next level. And you have to learn to read before you can get to the next level, right? So my point is, there is nothing wrong. In fact, there is a lot of study done that shows that actually the video games are best neurological tool. In fact, the first person shooting game makes not only the children's peripheral vision much better. I can tell you myself, I don't play video games. And when I sit down with the children trying to play video game, I'm always like, can you tell me what it says up on the top of the screen? Because I cannot see. Our peripheral vision as adults has actually limited, versus the child, they can see the whole screen and they can see all the things that are happening on the side. Their decision-making power, it starts to improve, and they develop the intuitive sense of when to shoot and when something is going to pop up. They start to develop these skills that we never did. So our executive decision making gets better and better by playing video games. And there's a lot of science that actually now shows that actually these are not the bad games. So we should be thinking about how the media is, as long as they are connecting with people. And I'm not suggesting that, you cut out meeting with physical, in a physical sense. I'm saying is, but don't think that this is bad. It is one part of their life, how they connect with other children who may not be in their neighborhood. And yes, they should still go out and meet other children. Yes, they need to still learn to socialize. Yes, they do still need to meet physically and get to know each other. So yes, answer to the other is yes. There's several things. The creativity is out the window. The creativity and curiosity is the one that is getting killed the most in the school, our school system. In fact, this is really interesting. When we hire people from Harvard Business School, it takes me 4 years to make them unlearn everything that they learned in the business school, because in a business school they taught about spreadsheets, that you build a model for the spreadsheet. And I keep telling them that, remember, there are so many unknowns in this world. Every single time there is an unknown, you have to make an assumption. And guess what happens? If you already believe something is not going to work, you make the assumption that low number. What does the spreadsheet tell you? Exactly what you already know, that your assumptions are going to be lower because you don't believe it is going to work. When you believe something is going to work, your assumptions make it higher number, that a spreadsheet tells you exactly what you already know. So learn to listen to your intuitive voice and forget about all these spreadsheets. And I still remember I hired this guy and I told him, let's go buy this company. And he comes up with this whole spreadsheet, why it makes no sense. And I told him, let me show you something. This is a very simple math. I'm telling you, this business will allow us to get a foothold into a new industry that we know nothing about. And that is all we really need out of this. Forget all these numbers, right? And that became one of our best acquisitions. And we ended up actually building a whole new business around it. The only reason I mentioned that is that people lose touch because we are now taught everything is about thinking. Tell me the zeros and ones. And I find that I am such a big believer in this intuition. In fact, some of the best decisions I have ever made, every time I have to make a tough decision that is the life altering decision, all I do is close my eyes and I want to feel, how do I feel having made that decision? I'm now a year later, 5 years later, how am I feeling having made that decision? And then sometimes I just walk away from it and people look at me, it's like, what do you mean you don't want to do it? I say, it just doesn't feel good. And that's it. It doesn't feel good. I'm not going to do it. Right. And I think learning to have that intuitive sense is something that can't be, in schools. In fact, think it's like a voodoo or a woo-woo thing, right?
Mhm.
Answer is that it's not a voodoo or woo-woo thing. That is where the magic happens. Teaching children that there are many, many ways of solving a problem. There are many acceptable answers. And having people who are non-expert in your field listening to their dumb question that you think are dumb would allow you to actually solve the problem in a way that you may have never even thought about it. So to me, bringing this naivety, bringing that, hey, what if this could be done, allows you to look at the problem differently, allows you to ask the questions which are very different questions that anyone else in the industry has ever asked.